The so-called Dark Ages. The term unfortunately isn't just a niche term used by e-celebs. You would be hard-pressed finding the phrase in dodgy history books and especially in pop culture. But don't worry me, the terror is single-handedly going to put an end to that. Now you're likely thinking, what do people mean by the Dark Ages? Well, what people are referring to is the Middle Ages, and usually implied using the term Dark Ages is a time period ranging from the 5th century to the 10th century AD, in Europe of course, which is also known as the Early Middle Ages. The early Middle Ages began with the fall of the Western Roman Empire and ended around the time when Vikings stopped raiding and began settling in Western Europe. The misconception originates not from Vice or Twitter or anywhere where you might initially suspect. It's not a modern phenomenon by any means. In fact, we can date it back to where everything started going wrong. 476 AD, the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Scholars at the time generally came from an education that taught Greece and Rome were the apex of humanity, and as a result viewed Europe and the time period following as barbaric. The term itself originates from an Italian scholar named Petrarch, who in the 1330s referred to the time after the fall of Western Rome as a time of darkness compared to the light of classical antiquity. During the Renaissance, humanist scholars like Petrarch started posting the modern equivalent of reject monarchy, embrace tradition videos. By the time of the Reformation, the Protestants, who were obviously heavily critical towards the power structure of the Catholic Church, found it useful to use this myth to show awful things became when the Church got into control. Enlightenment era thinkers found this term quite useful in bashing the traditional and corrupt Church. Usage of the term Dark Ages peaked in France and Germany in the 18th century, but by the time of the 19th and 20th century it slowly faded out of existence, and no good modern historian would risk being caught lacking by saying the term Dark Ages. So how dark were the Dark Ages? Well, all things considered, not that bad. Imagine an empire as large as Rome collapsed in the modern day. This would be like Germany and France just capitulating after a long decline. Obviously the rest of the EU would take a very long time to recover as a result. Now imagine there aren't any other countries to get loans from, or anywhere to trade for essential resources. That's what basically happened to the rest of Europe after 476 AD. As a serf in the early Middle Ages, you were at least guaranteed a home from your vassal. Although yes, as a serf you're essentially owned by your vassal, but under serf laws you had serfdom rights, which include protection from robbers or attackers, charity from your vassal in hard times like during the famine, and a vassal couldn't kick serfs out of his land without genuine legal reason. These rights were enforced by the manorial court. All these are more than you're guaranteed from your mortgage with Bank of America. Of course serfs live labour-intensive lifestyles, one of humans not. Another major misconception is that there were no philosophical, scientific or artistic advancements during the early Middle Ages. As you can probably guess, this is far from the truth. Under Charlemagne's rule,
I suddenly remembered my Charlemagne.
The Carolingian Renaissance in the 8th and 9th century occurred, which saw a great increase in the study of jurisprudence, literature, architecture, writing, the arts and of course scripture. This all happened because Charlemagne created standardized learning across his empire in order to educate his subjects, because he believed education allowed you to study scripture better and become a better Christian. The courts of Charlemagne created standardized letter forms, lowercase letters and question marks. Early versions of lute were created during this time, and a lot of beautiful cathedrals and monasteries were built. The early Middle Ages produced many great philosophers, Boethius, Thomas Aquinas, Augustine and Constantine the African, just to name a few. That René Descartes fellow was heavily influenced by the works of Augustine. Those who insist on defending the concept that the early Middle Ages were a dark age like to bring up that philosophers and great thinkers like those I've just named were oppressed and silenced. I'll personally send you all of Luther's ad revenue if you can name a single period in history where governments and people don't attempt to silence figures who speak out against the status quo. It should also be noted a lot of work from this time period didn't survive, so there are likely more great works that we'll never even know about. The reason why I focus on the early Middle Ages and not the Middle Ages as a whole is because the early Middle Ages is the only time period where there's some logic in favour of the pro-Dark Age terminology group. I gave them the benefit of the doubt by only talking about the 5th to the 10th century because that was the worst era in the Middle Ages, but since I want to fully put this myth to bed, I'll briefly talk about some of the major advancements from the 11th to the 14th century. Even though the Middle Ages didn't technically end until 1520, I don't think people are going to argue that Renaissance Europe was in a dark age. Some famous thinkers from the time include Roger Bacon and William of Ockham. The first university was founded in Bologna in 1088, followed by a university in Paris, Cambridge and Oxford, all of which predate the Aztec Empire by hundreds of years. There's great advancements made in agriculture. Central heating was invented in the 9th century. which has been calculated to be 90% efficient. 1200 years later, I'm cold while writing this because his room doesn't heat well. Oil painting was invented in the 13th century. And finally, my favourite type of stone was invented in the 9th century. All the information I've just talked about is readily available with a quick few Google searches, and I'm not even the first person to talk about this. There's plenty of articles, and I'd assume plenty of videos that discuss a similar subject. But a niche group of people still like to use it for evil and dishonourable reasons to promote their ideology. Generally, a small percentage of left-wingers and New Age atheists like to say terms like Christian Dark Age and use this to attack Christianity. People in general have this misconception that the Dark Ages is an actual time period. I personally did until quite recently. My theory is the main culprit behind this is pop culture, how they portray this time period. Movies like Braveheart, The Princess Bride, Robin Hood, Monty Python, Game of Thrones, and the adaptations of Lord of the Rings give us the impression that this time period was much worse than it actually was. It's likely a combination of how it's represented by pop culture, by certain political groups, and bad historians. Mixing these three together and expecting no negative effects would be like giving me my piece and locking me in a room with the ops and thinking they would leave safely. That's all for this video. Please like and subscribe to further inflame my ego.